Nurah Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nurah Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nurah Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nurah Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nurah Muhammad. I'm glad to be back with you for another episode of the podcast. If you have not subscribed, I encourage you to do so. Where you are listening to this podcast, whatever app you're using, and I encourage you to subscribe and share it with your family, your friends, your colleagues, if this podcast is meaningful to you. I would also encourage you to leave me a review. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can go and leave me a rating and review. I appreciate it. They say that by leaving ratings and reviews, that it can enhance listenership, and so I definitely would love to grow the listeners on the podcast. If you listen on Spotify, the Spotify app allows you to comment as well. You can leave a comment. There's a Q&A on Spotify app, and so you're welcome to do so. I encourage all feedback, and I get some quite interesting feedback, and I love group participation, and so I do encourage you. And in thinking about some of the comments that this podcast has received, first let me remind you or inform you, if you are not already aware, that this podcast, the goal of it, it's intended to tug on the soul and consciousness of the Black community, because I believe that in so many different ways, our communities and our mindset and our culture um, is degrading. It's eroding our values. They're eroding right away. And I believe that if we are reminded of who we are, or informed in some cases of who we are, and understand what our purpose is and understand what our power is, then we will realize that we are accountable to what's happening in our community. And then, because we should be accountable, then we can take action. We can take steps to improve the various areas in which we deserve improved outcomes. And so this podcast rather, is specifically for the Black community. And I was speaking, this was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago now. I was speaking somewhere, and it was a mixed audience of Caucasian people, Black people. And someone asked me about the podcast. And, you know, to the whole group, I explained, what the purpose of this podcast is for. Also, the guests on the podcast have exclusively been Black people and will exclusively be Black people, because I want to put people in front of us who can be an inspiration, and can be a reflection of what we can do and what we should do. And during this event, during this program, a young man, a Caucasian young man, he suggested that if I opened this podcast up uh, and targeted people who weren't just Black, then that might be better for the podcast and better for those who listen. And um, it wasn't the time or place to inform him then. But this podcast will remain as it is for the Black community, because the Black community is the community that's in most need of help. That doesn't mean that there's a racist twist or tinge or stain on the Nurah Speaks podcast. I recognize that our community needs quite a bit of help. And if I can be a helper or some kind of aid to our community, then I thank Allah God for blessing me to be that person. However, it would not be right for me to change the format, to change the intended audience, to change my language so that someone else could be comfortable because they're uncomfortable with me trying to bring accountability and information to my people. Um, that is, and I stand firm on that, and I don't back down from that because I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I would not be producing this podcast in the way that I did if I thought that there was something wrong with it. Now, technically, certainly there could be areas of improvement. Content wise, there may be areas of improvement. Perhaps my diction, my word choice. I'm always open to critical feedback. However, the idea or the suggestion that I would or should broaden the audience, to be inclusive of all. When I recognize that our community is so in need of help and we are so far behind, um, then that would not be fair of me. And I understand who I am, and I understand the purpose that I have. And I thank Allah God for awakening me to this, or for helping me to recognize it. And there's something to someone trying to make you or me uncomfortable with feeling confident and joyful about who and what you are, who and what I am. Um, Now, I'm not saying that this young man had any malicious intent. I'm sure he was trying to be helpful because that was a room of people who help other people. So I don't take offense to him and to that suggestion or to other suggestions in the comments that I get on social media. But sometimes it is time for us to clean our own house. And it is not fair for me to tell my neighbor or to help my neighbor clean his or her house when my house is out of order. So the house that I live in is the house that I'm most concerned about. And then once we get our house in order, then we can talk about other people's homes and the broader community in the context of that. However, I'm confident in who I am. I believe that the message that comes from this podcast is relevant and necessary for my people. And I thank those who listen, who may not be a Black man or Black woman, but recognize that there's something coming from this podcast that's instrumental, especially if you're working with Black children. I think about not just Black children and Black people. You know, we need a special kind of help. We really, really do. And we need those who help us to understand us, to love us for sure, and to understand us, because our children are not like any other children. Our women are not like any other women, and our men are not like any other men. And the experience that we have had in this nation, um, it's an experience unlike any other experience. And so because of that, we can't be treated like everybody else. In schools, when there's a child that requires a specific learning technique, a specific way to nurture the message and nurture the educational instruction into that student, that person has an individual education plan. It's not a general education plan. I work with folks who have developmental disabilities, and whatever plan or rehabilitation format that's set up and established has to meet the needs of that person. It's an individualized plan. And so our people, we need something that is individualized. We can't just say, they say, well, you should be able to pull yourself up from your own bootstraps. Well, not only does my boot not have straps, but I didn't get the boots. When they said line up to get boots, they ran out before I could get my boots. This is the experience of our people. And sure, other people come to the United States of America who have far less than we have. And I'm talking about Black people, the descendants of slaves, even those who may be in poverty. we may have more than people who come to this nation with nothing but a shirt on their backs. Now, I'm talking about we may have more physically. We may have a shelter that we live in. However, what those people have who come to this nation, they have a national pride. They have a flag because they're coming from Honduras, Guatemala, um, Mexico. They have a flag. They have a national pride, and they have a drive and an ambition to do something for themselves and to make something for themselves that's just not there for those of us who are descendants of American slavery who are here, right? We look at our brothers and sisters who come from the continent of Africa. They come from Nigeria, South Africa. Our people come from Haiti, right? And you say, well, they look like us, and certainly they probably experience racism, and we know that they do. They may come from Jamaica. So we have the skin tone, we have the facial features and the facial structure, right? And so certainly they too are bound to face and encounter the ugliness of racism in America. But they have something that we don't. They have a national pride. They have a drive, and they have an ambition, and they have a responsibility, an inherent responsibility. They come to this nation. Their people are back where they came from, and they have the heaviness on their mind that they have a whole family and possibly a generation counting on them. You know, the drive that we could have had as descendants of slaves was crushed out of us during the slavery experience. We have been neutralized in this nation. The drive that other people have, we don't have it. And so they look at us and they say, man, what's wrong with these people? Yes, there's something wrong with us. If you compare someone who comes here with nothing but the shirt on their back, and we have shelter, we have running water, we have indoor plumbing. So what is the problem? Yes, there is a problem. And we have to recognize it. You know, if other people recognize it, you know, well, that's great. But we have to recognize it. And we not only do we have to recognize it, but we have to address it. And we also have to rid ourselves of the mindset that it's someone else's responsibility to fix our problem. Now, we might not have been the authors of the problem, but we can't expect someone else to employ their time, their energy, and their resources to fix our problem. Even though they may benefit from our problem, they may be in power because of our problem, they are not responsible for our problem. That is us. So we need something specific. We need a message that's tailored for us. We need an individual education plan. We need an individual habilitation plan. And we can't make an apology because others are not comfortable with us addressing us and us addressing our own needs. We can't apologize for that. And I, on this podcast, will not apologize for doing my best to ensure the content is one that suffices the problems that we have in our community. Now, if other people can benefit from this message, well, that's great because truth is universal, right? However, for the Black man, Black woman, Black child, and Black community, we are a very, very specific people. And so we need a specific and cultivated message for us. And I pray that that's what you're getting on the Nurah Speaks podcast. You can let me know in the comments on social media. You can let me know by email. I'm always interested in your feedback. However, those who are not comfortable, then there's so many other podcasts that you can listen to. And you have the right, you have the privilege and the opportunity to listen to something else. However, those of us who are serious about addressing our community, who want to be inspired, who want to be invigorated, who want novel approaches, I pray that you'll keep coming back to hear what's being shared here on the Nurah Speaks podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property. And to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nurah Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, nurahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@nurahspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nurah Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nurah Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.